So today we celebrate the feast day of St. Bartholomew. I'm sure he's everybody's favorite apostle. Right. We know almost nothing about him. And you're saying, well, what does this gospel have to do with anything that has to do with St. Bartholomew? Well, scholars think that maybe Nathaniel was another name for Bartholomew. Of course, many people in that time had different names. You know, we know that Peter had his name changed from Simon to Peter, but a lot of times we think Saul became Paul, and so it's like, no, he had both of those names. Saul was when he was working amidst the Jewish communities, and Paul was a Greek name that he had. So he had these two different names, and we know that was a standard thing, that depending on which community you were with, you had different names. So they think that Bartholomew and Nathaniel are the same person. And so we hear about the calling of Nathaniel. And I love the fact that he's just like, can anything good come from Nazareth? That he doubts at first. We need that, I think. We need that for our own struggles and the like. But Jesus recognizes him, calls him by name. Says, here's a true child of Israel. Now it's interesting, he's saying, well, there's no duplicity in him. Well, Israel, Jacob, he had a lot of duplicity in him as a young man, right? That he went and he had his brothers sell him his birthright, for a bowl of pottage, and he tricked his father into giving him the blessing instead of his brother Esau. So he had plenty of duplicity. Then he ran off because he was afraid of what his brother was going to do to him, and his brother was going to kill him. And then over the years of being tricked himself by his father-in-law, that he learned humility, and he learned not to have any guile, not to have any duplicity. And so we see then that, okay, maybe Nathaniel didn't have to go through all of that. Maybe he was just a man without duplicity. And so Jesus says, he's a true child of Israel, who Israel became. We look and we say, what else do we know about Bartholomew? Well, we don't know anything. We have some traditions that say that he went to India and to Armenia, and he was flayed and then beheaded in Armenia, and that probably did happen. But really, we don't know anything about the man. And this also is important, that when we hear in the first reading, right, from Revelation, everybody's favorite book in the Bible, very easy to understand and interpret. Right, Father. But they talk about the 12 gates, the 12 angels, that here the 12 courses of stone as its foundations, that the apostles are the foundation of the New Jerusalem. Even if we don't know anything about them, Jesus had a very special mission for each one of them. Yeah, we know Peter and James and John and certainly Judas. But we know some of the apostles a little bit, but the others we really don't know too much about. And yet each one was precious to Jesus, called to be an apostle, called to follow him. And a lot of times I think we also think that, well, if I'm not up in front of people, if people don't know who I am, then am I that important? The reality is, God has called each of us by name. He has a special mission for each one of you, even if you're not in front of anyone. I think about, if you've ever seen the movie A Man for All Seasons, where Richard Rich is coming to St. Thomas More and saying, can you get me a position? He wants to be in government. He wants to be in politics. He wants to have a place of authority. And Thomas is like, no, this is not good for you. And then finally he says, I have a position for you. He says, oh, you do? He says, yeah, it's a teacher at the local school. A teacher. Who cares about teachers? He says, you'd be a good teacher, Rich. And who would know about it? You, your students, God. Not a bad public, that. But he didn't want that. And he ended up betraying Thomas More. And at the end, as he's betraying him, Thomas says to him, basically, if you gain the whole world and lose your soul, but for Wales, that he gained the whole world and yet he lost his soul. Presumably. I don't know if he ended up having a conversion. But we look and say, you would have been better to have been a teacher, to have been a good teacher, where maybe only God knew what he had done, that audience of one. We don't really know too much about Bartholomew, and yet he worked for God. And people may not know you beyond your family, your friends, small group, and yet God sees. And if you live out your vocation well, not a bad public that. May we turn to Almighty God and ask him through the intercession of St. Bartholomew for that grace to be able to live out our vocations well, that we not worry about how the world sees us, but only how God sees us.